Chapter 3, 21 Seed of Envy. As he heard those words of Hiro, while looking him straight in the eye, different complicated emotions started to take shape within his heart. Yet he couldn't bring himself to speak his heart out. Experiencing Yuya's unresponsiveness, Hiro felt quite pitiful and sympathetic towards Yuya. If possible, he wanted to help Yuya, but Yuya had already built a wall around him, and forcefully taking that wall down would only worsen the situation. Thus, he decided to leave Yuya by himself for the time being. However, that didn't mean that he was giving up on him. It's just leaving him alone for some time seemed the best possible outcome right now, since Hiro wasn't good with words in the first place. Then I'll get going for now. Bidding his farewell, Hiro walked past Yuya without waiting for his response. For some while, even after Hiro's departure, Yuya stood frozen at his place with a hollow heart. He could no longer tell what was right and what was wrong. His face betrayed of any kinds of emotions. He simply stood there expressionless, staring at the ground beneath. What was going on in your mind when you made that final block? A somewhat timid-looking guy who was seated opposite to Shun, who right now was surrounded by flocks of players, excitedly asked. With a smirk on his face, while puffing his chest and flaring his nostril, Shun rose from his seat at once. Brimming with pride, he then answered in somewhat over-exaggerating tone. At that moment, when that arrogant captain of the opposing team was rushing towards me, I said to myself that I'd eat this guy alive. Listening to his exaggerated explanation, the entire room got silent as they all focused their attention towards Shun, who right now was the center of the attention. Continuing his explanation, he then jolted his eyes towards Akihiro, who had raised this question. Then I looked him in the eye. In that moment, he too fiercely looked at me. But nonetheless, I didn't divert my eyes off of him. Instead, I glared back at him and challenged him. Come at me if you dare. Lost in his storytelling, everybody became intrigued as his way of explaining details piqued their interest. Almost everybody present there was aware that what seemed to be only few seconds to the onlookers was rather long for the ones experiencing it. For example, while making a simple save, countless thoughts appear in the mind of the keeper. In those split seconds, he had to read the distance, predict the shoot course, and also try to predict the next move the attacker would make. Just as Einstein had famously proclaimed in his one of the renowned theory, time is relative. What may seem to others only a fraction of a second, to other might be an eternity to the one experiencing it. But what we onlookers see is only the outcome. Then while he was rushing towards me, I also rushed towards him. I was ready to put my life on the line for making that save. In that moment, I didn't care if I got pelted on my face or on my balls. Then just as he was about to shoot, I sensed a change in his aura. It was like all of a sudden he became even more scary. The listeners who were ardently listening to Shun's exaggerated story was so engrossed in his story that some of them, while feeling the suspense, unwittingly gulped their saliva. Then bam! Just as Shun finished articulating his words, Hiro, who had walked into the room totally unnoticed, spoke. So much suspense for one save. Hearing his words, which to them came out of nowhere and spoiled the fun, startled many of them. But soon they started grumpily complaining about his intervention. Why do you have to spoil the fun when we were just about to get to the climax? Yeah, couldn't you at least let him finish his story? Especially Shun. He seemed the most unhappiest out of them all. After all, why wouldn't he be unhappy? He was telling such an interesting experience, but he walked out of nowhere and ruined his story. Immediately, Shun then started retaliating while making an unsatisfied face. Weren't you satisfied with your previous intervention? It wasn't Shun's first time getting asked this particular question. After the final match, he had been asked this same question by his teammates from the national team. And even that time, Hiro had spoiled his story by intervening in the middle. Well, your story is just too unrealistic. Hiro answered nonchalantly, as if he had done nothing wrong. What's so unrealistic about it? In somewhat unsatisfied tone, Shun questioned Hiro. From start to finish, everything is unrealistic. First of all, do you even use your brains? His words were like a direct slap to his face, and hearing those words triggered Shun as his face became red with anger. However, next instance, just as he was about to launch himself towards Hiro, somebody in the crowd burst into laughter. Ha ha! Followed by that laughter, a chained reaction took place as one by one almost everybody present in the crowd burst into laughter. Ha ha! Hiro's kind of got a point. Yeah, it's rather questionable that Shun thought that much. Ha ha! Yeah, we're talking about Shun after all. Soon enough, the once tensed mood inside the room became lively as laughter of players echoed all around the room, followed by several defeats and draws. It had been quite some time since the dormitory had been this cheerful. Inya, who happened to caught glimpse of this extremely lively atmosphere from outside the door, couldn't help but feel complicated upon seeing this scene. He should be rejoicing like the rest, but yet he couldn't bring himself to rejoice. He had never been treated like this, let alone someone showing goodwill. During his stay with this team, not even a single person had offered even a friendly handshake to him. Even the treatment one would get was based on their skills. Not only did Hiro intervene the story of Shun and spoiled the fun, he even insulted Shun directly to his face, yet nobody was angry at him. Instead, they all appreciated his sense of humor. Why was the treatment with him and Hiro different? Why was he treated like shit while he's treated like king? Chapter 324, Mateo's Decision. The moment he heard that he'd been invited by the national team, an irresistible feeling of joy emerged within him. Yet he couldn't bring himself to showcase those emotions. A call-up for the national team meant that he would be out for many months to train with the national team. And also, since it wasn't a call-up for the senior team, he wouldn't be paid much either. If he wanted to get paid, then his only option would be to win the tournament, which was a gamble in its own. But if he could play, he was bound to get some exposure. However, unlike many of the players who had been called up, he only played in local leagues. Even the fact that he had been called despite, that was a miracle on its own. Despite this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that had presented itself right in front of his door, Mateo was rather hesitant on accepting this opportunity. And his parents, upon noticing his hesitation, felt their heart ache as an overwhelming feeling of grief, pity, and self-fury made their heart heavy. They were well aware of the reason behind his hesitation. They were well aware of the sacrifices this poor little boy had made for them. And most of all, they were well aware of his love for football. This poor little boy who hadn't even turned 18, yet had sacrificed his dream to help sustain his family. And that once pretty face, which right now was full of scars and bruises, made the situation even worse as it made their hearts bleed. Immediately, tears rolled down the eyes of his mother, as she could no longer hold herself from looking at her son's miserable state. Fate may have deprived him of his legs, but he didn't want his son to give up on his dreams because of him. At this moment, he realized how selfish he had been in the past. Drinking his life out just to forget the pain, he had made his family suffer. Sure, he had lost his legs, and that was a devastating blow to him and his family. But what he did afterwards was even worse. While he indulged himself in alcohol to drink his pain away, he neglected the only people who cared about him. And right now, he could very well see the consequences of his action. His son, with whom he hadn't had any decent conversation with after the incident, right now looked so pathetic and miserable. And who had forced him into such state? It was him. Without even anyone needing to tell him, he knew he was the reason behind his son's miserable state. And upon realizing this, he felt extremely guilty. Contorting his face in despair and agony, he tightly pursed his lips, trying his absolute best to endure the sensation of guilt and pain that was coursing through his body. He couldn't even bring himself to look his son in the eyes. He was the culprit behind his son's and his family's misery. Still, at this moment, he felt like he had to at least atone for his wrongdoing and try to correct his mistakes. Although no amount of atonement shall ever amount to repay the pain and suffering he had inflicted on his family, still he had a something. In a rather shaky voice filled with grief, he then called out to his son, Mateo. Upon hearing the call of his father, Mateo's eyes perked up as he drifted his gaze towards his father, who had called his name after so long. At that moment, he felt an unusually hollow sensation as he found the figure of his father extremely lonely and sad. It was different than usual. Hinting him to come towards him, his father gestured him to come close. With a frown, Mateo did as instructed by his father and walked towards him. Appearing near him, he collapsed on his knees to look at his father's face, who was sitting in a rather shabby wheelchair. The moment he met his father's eyes, his father lunged forward his upper body towards him as he wrapped his arms around his back and hugged him. Immediately, a sensation of warmth coursed through his body. His pupils enlarged as he felt taken aback by his father's sudden reaction, which caught him totally off guard. But before he could speak anything, his father cut him short as, "My little boy, you have suffered a lot because of this loser father of yours. But you shouldn't suffer more. You don't need to make more sacrifices for the sake of your family." Those words, although warm and soothing, right now stung him like the stings of wasps, and his eyes started becoming heavy upon hearing those words. He wanted to tell his father that it wasn't his fault. He wanted to assure him that he was fine. But somehow, he couldn't bring those words at the tip of his tongue. Slowly, tears streamed down his face as his grip around his father's back tightened. This very man whom he was embracing right now was the man who had taught him to play football, the joy football. But this very man right now was in a pathetic condition, blaming himself. Even his sister, who was watching this scene from a distance, was tearing right now. At this moment, the eyes of this entire family of four was moist and flooded, and every single one of them shared almost the same sentiment. They all were sad and remorseful about their condition. It was like as if the scene from the time when his father had lost his legs was playing again. "You should go, Matteo. You should chase after your dreams, Matteo. You don't have to burden yourself with the responsibilities of this family, Matteo." His father spoke, trying to persuade Matteo to grab this opportunity to fulfill his dreams. But even so, Matteo was still hesitant but warehouse. Before he could finish his sentence, his father cut him short as he said, "We'll work things out, Matteo, so don't worry about us. Every one of us here wants you to chase your dreams, Matteo. You've done already more than enough, my little boy. Yes, Matteo, your father is right. Don't worry about us, Matteo, and chase your dreams. Yes, Matteo, you don't have to sacrifice yourself again." His mother and sister added. Their words made him even more sad, but against their reluctance, he couldn't bring himself to turn them down. Thus, he reluctantly accepted their suggestion and decided to take this opportunity. Nodding his head, Matteo answered, I'll go." Chapter 323, A Call Up. "Where were you all?" Opening the door, while making an irritated face, he was ready to lash out at his parents. But the next instant as he opened the door, his pupils constricted as he became tongue-tied upon seeing the gloomy look on the face of his mother. Listless eyes that seemed rather puffy and bloodshot, pale-looking face and shoulders that were slumped forward. It was as if a dark shadow was looming over her face. Seeing her distressful state, Matteo couldn't help but become frantic. "What happened to you, Mom?" Frowning his brows with a face that was filled with extreme concern, he asked in a rather loud voice. Just by looking at her miserable state, he could tell that something terrible had happened to her. And also right now, she was all alone. His mother, however, didn't answer. Instead, she collapsed on her knees as she threw herself in the arms of young Matteo. Those puffy eyes, which were struggling to restrain the emotions contained within it, burst as she wept like an infant while hugging Matteo tightly. Matteo's mind went blank in that moment upon encountering his mother's sudden outburst. Tears continuously streamed down her face, yet she didn't speak anything. And Matteo couldn't even bring himself to ask now. All he could do right now was stand still and support her. For a while, his mother continued to weep at the foot of the door. And Matteo himself, upon experiencing this moment of sadness, couldn't refrain himself from holding back his tears. With tears rolling down his face, he stood there like a mountain, supporting her while preventing himself from breaking apart like her. Given the age difference, it should have been quite the opposite. However, in this instant, Matteo simply couldn't bring himself to break apart. Finally, after weeping for a while, his mother spoke in her teary voice, breaking the news of the misfortune his father had suffered. "Your father. He's at the hospital," and that was enough to bring him on his knees. Immediately upon hearing that news, Matteo, who had been desperately trying to hold himself from breaking apart, felt like the sky had fallen upon him. The tears which were streaming down his face like a light rainfall started downpouring as he felt extremely devastated by the news. Coming back to the present, Matteo, after hesitating for a while, finally strode towards his home. Knock, knock. Standing in front of the main door, he knocked on the door, and soon he heard a clanking sound as he noticed the opening of the door. Good news, brother. As if she knew, without even needing to look at him, that it would be him at the door, his sister excitedly spoke while opening the door. But immediately, no sooner had she opened the door, her smile faded away as she frowned, and a look of concern replaced the excitation on her face. You scuffled again? Sounding extremely concerned, she asked while looking at him with her eyes full of concern. Those bandages taped on his face could hardly conceal the bruises on his face. And without even needing to deeply look at his face, his sister could tell, just from a glance based on those bandages, that he had gotten into a fight yet again today. After all, it wasn't her first time seeing him in such tattered condition, and she was also well aware of the bets he would put and the risk he would take to earn some money. Yet despite seeing him such a sorry state, she could never bring herself to tell him to stop. With her father acting like a total loser and her mother slaving her life away to fulfill the basic needs of this family, they were barely holding on. But with her brother earning money, a little burden had been lifted off of the shoulder of her mother, who had already started showing signs of sickness. Sure, he could have also worked some other jobs. So why would he have to do this kind of dangerous stuff to earn money? Previously, he had tried working as a delivery man, but because of his young appearance, he would often get scammed and swindled. And the pay wasn't much either. Forced to drop out of the school to reduce some expenses, he didn't even have any educational qualification to get a decent job. And also because of his young age, he couldn't be hired legally as well, which only left him with odd jobs and illegal methods to earn money. He could have become a drug dealer or a smuggler, but he hated those stuffs and the risk it came with doing those stuffs. He wanted to alleviate the situation of his family, but he wasn't willing to stoop that low to alleviate the situation of his family either. Finally, he then did what he was good at and what he loved the most, play football. But once again, a problem arose. Youth team didn't pay much, and no professional team was willing to sign him for their senior team. Don't make a fuss about it. And here, take this money to buy some books. Handing out the money to her, he tried to ignore her concerned gazes which were concentrated at him and try to walk inside. But as soon as he walked inside, he found both his sickly-looking mother and his sickly-looking father, who seemed rather sober today, awaiting for him. You're back, Matteo? His mother spoke in her gentle tone while looking at him. Yeah. Swiftly answering such while nodding his head, he tried to walk away, unwilling to confront them to not make them unnecessarily worried about him. He didn't want to confront them right now. A letter came for you, Matteo. While he was trying to avoid them, his mother continued. It's from a national team. Immediately upon hearing that it was a letter from a national team, Matteo, who was trying to walk away, halted his movement. His eyes, which were desperately trying to avoid meeting the gazes of his parents upon hearing that news, at once jolted towards their direction. They want you to play for the U-17 team in the upcoming U-17 World Cup, Matteo. Chapter 3, 22 Fragments of Memories. As the last rays of the sun beat down on the dusty streets of Buenos Aires, young Matteo, while counting the money he had made by demonstrating his skills in the streets, made his way towards his home. Though the streets were painted in different lively shades portraying the beauty of the streets, and was rather appealing to the eyes right now, given the golden rays of sun falling on the streets, making it look quite aesthetic, still the thick stench of poverty that was lingering around the streets was rather suffocating. All of a sudden, he halted his movement as he arrived in front of his house. Looking at this worn-down, shabby place, a look of disdain flashed in his eyes. Even though it was his home, and he had spent his entire childhood in this place, yet as of recent, he couldn't bring himself to love this place. If not for this place tying him down, he would have had a different life. He wouldn't have to suffer miserably every day. An unfortunate upbringing, an alcoholic father who's good for nothing, a younger sister who has her needs suppressed, and a mother who slaves her life away to feed this family of four. Every nook and cranny of this shabby, cramped house which exuded a thick stench of poverty, he hated it. If possible, he wanted to run away from this place. And sure, he could have done that as well. On multiple occasions, he even had such thoughts. Yet he could never execute those thoughts. Because if he were to leave, he'll only make his sister, his father, and his mother's life even more miserable. Despite his father being an alcoholic, he didn't despise his father as well. After all, he wasn't like this originally. The situation had forced him into such a sorry state. If only fate wouldn't have toyed with him and robbed him of his only medium to sustain his livelihood, he wouldn't be in such a miserable state. It was about at the time when he was 13. An unfortunate accident, which turned his whole life upside down, had took place. One summer day when he returned home after playing football, he was met with an empty house. Usually around that time, his mother would be preparing dinner while his father would be sitting in front of the TV screen to watch some football. Growing up in Argentina, similar to many other households, his entire family was a huge fan of Messi. Although his father, who belonged to a generation before of Messi, preferred Maradona more than Messi, nonetheless, he still liked to watch Messi play. But that day as he arrived at his home, he found his home unusually silent and empty. "Mom? Dad? Alexia? Where are you all?" Mateo called out their names as he searched the entire house. Yet not even a single living entity could be found at that place apart from him at that time. Where did everybody go? Mateo murmured a bit worriedly and furiously at the same time as his heart started growing a little anxious and furious about their uninformed absence. There were instances when nobody would be present at home, but usually they would inform the neighbors about their absence. And right now, as he couldn't find his parents and sister at home, he then walked out of the room to ask the neighbors if any information was left for him about their absence. But as he inquired the neighbors about their absence, they simply shook their head as they answered that nothing had been informed to them. Upon hearing their responses, Mateo grew even more anxious and furious. Frowning his brows and with a darkened face full of fury, he helplessly strode back towards his room while mumbling like a madman. Currently, he was extremely displeased by his family's behavior of leaving him in the dark. Like, how could they leave him by himself? Even if they had to go out or if they would arrive late, at the least they could have still left information or a note. However, right now, he had no clues about their absence. There was simply nothing he could do now than wait. Sure, his father and mother did carry a keypad phone, but apart from those two phones, there wasn't any other phones available in the house. And also, he didn't know any of their phone number as well. In such scenario, what could he do than wait for them to reach out to him first, or just wait for their arrival? Growl. Since having breakfast, he hadn't had anything to eat, and all these worrying, searching, and inquiring further accentuated his hunger. Grabbing onto his growling stomach, he then walked towards the kitchen in hopes of finding something to appease his hunger. However, the moment he turned towards the utensils that had been used in the morning, he found all the utensils empty. Not even leftovers could be found in those used cooking pots. Looking at those empty pots, he became even more irritated as he started running his mouth out of fury. At least, you could have left something to eat. Now what am I supposed to do? Starve to death? The absence of his parents was already getting on his nerves. But now this hunger was driving him insane as well. Losing all sense of reasoning, while going through the cooking pots, he was rather harsh while handling those utensils. Several clanking noises of utensils could be heard echoing in his house at this moment because of his rough handling. Upon hearing this noise, one might think if somebody was throwing a tantrum in Mateo's house. Well, they wouldn't be wrong, though, since Mateo was actually throwing a tantrum. Even so, venting his fury on the utensils wouldn't miraculously fill those empty pots, which is why he then turned his attention towards raw vegetables. However, there wasn't much vegetable in the vegetable basket as well. Apart from some potatoes, onions, garlics, tomatoes, and some beans, nothing much could be found in the entire kitchen. This scene to Mateo, given his already bad mood, was rather depressing and frustrating. Yet, heaving a deep sigh, he tried to calm himself and resigned himself to his helplessness. "Guess I'll boil some potatoes for the time being." In a dejected tone, he murmured as he turned the stoves on and put a pot filled with water above the burning stove. Afterwards, rinsing some potatoes, he then put the potatoes inside the pot. Just where have all of them gone? At least they should have informed the neighbors. Sounding a bit angry, he murmured all alone. And after some while, as he was about to take those potatoes out, he heard a knock on the door. Immediately upon hearing those knocks, he thought of his parents and sister. I won't go easy on them this time. Grumpily murmuring such, he made his way towards the door. Chapter 325, A Mysterious Figure. After that previous encounter with Yuya, contrary to Hiro's expectation, Yuya became rather distant. Instead of opening up, he became even more reserved. It was like as if he was intentionally trying to avoid Hiro and the rest. Experiencing Yuya's aloofness, Hiro and the rest were quite stunned by his behavior. All they wanted was to help him, but Yuya had built up an invisible wall around him. All I wanted to do was help, but he isn't even willing to listen. Sounding extremely furious, Shun, who had been shut down by Yuya a moment ago when he tried advising him about the mistakes he was committing, complained. Hiro, however, remained silent despite hearing his complaints, while sizing Yuya with his eyes. Witnessing Hiro's silence, Shun didn't feel like talking more as well. Fine, you can do whatever you like. Furiously speaking such, Shun then headed towards his position to resume the training. Unlike Hiro, he had been fed up with Yuya's behavior, and he no longer wanted to concern himself with him. Currently, they were doing some shooting drills, and Shun, being the keeper, had noticed some flaws that, if corrected, would enhance the shooting of Yuya. But Yuya wasn't willing to listen to him. Fui! Everybody gather around. No sooner had Shun started to walk towards his position, the trainers immediately ordered the players to gather around. And immediately as the trainers voiced their orders, players began to gather around the coaches. Now, everybody listen up. For our tomorrow's match, as you all know, we'll be facing Aomori, who currently are ahead of us, and also the league leaders. And since both Shun and Hiro, our two core players, will be leaving for the U-17 World Cup, they won't get to play some of the final matches, which means that for us to attain the top spot, this match is very important to us. Do you guys get it? One of the instructor sternly reminded the importance of tomorrow's game to the players. Just from a sheer tone of his voice, which sounded rather grievous, one could tell how important this match was for the team. Thus, everybody present at the field ardently listened to his words without making a single noise. Even without his reminder, the weight of this match was quite evident in both on and off the field. As for past few days, players of Kawasaki had become rather serious while training, and almost everybody were putting more effort than required. It had also been a common sight to see players training in the field even after the end of the training. But as he reminded the players, all of a sudden the atmosphere around the training ground became rather heavy while the mood around the ground became quite tensed. Rumors such as the team was nothing without Hiro had already started circulating among the fans, and players of the team were quite aware of those rumors as well. Still, almost nobody was able to raise their voice against such rumors because the results spoke the truth. And unwilling to admit, it was akin to being stubborn and short-sighted. Thus, despite the rumor floating around, nobody had the guts to say that it was a false rumor. Yet almost nobody in the team had thought of putting the blame on Hiro or the fans. They were trying their best, but lack of Hiro had been quite evident on the field, and almost everybody in the team felt the absence of Hiro while playing. Sensing the flames of determination burning furiously in their hearts and eyes, the trainers felt quite satiated with their attitude this time around. And although he was planning on saying more, but upon witnessing their attitude and the mindset they had built, he didn't feel like telling any further. He could somehow feel that his players were quite ready for the match. After an intense training session, while the luminous sphere of moon was relatively high up in the sky while lying on his bed, Hiro's eyes were currently fixated on his mobile phone. In pretense of analyzing the previous matches of his team during his absence, he had got his coach's permission to use the mobile during off hours. However, right now, he wasn't watching the matches of his teammates. Rather, he was watching the match between Argentina U-17 and Brazil U-17. What? All of a sudden, his pupils enlarged as he abruptly rose from his bed upon seeing a play made by Mateo, who had just come up from a substitution. Who is this number 19? Hiro murmured to himself in disbelief. Although he didn't know much about the players of the U17 team of both footballing giants like Brazil and Argentina, he still knew about the notable players that would later go on to make an impact on the world football. Yet, even in his past life, he had never heard of this player called Mateo Gomez from Argentina. He knew about Koa Elias, a notable player from Brazil who at this time was playing for Fluminense, or Claudio Echeverri from Argentina, who currently was playing for River Plate, but later would go on to sign with Manchester City, a dominant team in Europe who had made Premier League one of the toughest league in the world look like a farmer's league by bagging multiple championships. Yet he had never heard of this player called Mateo Gomez, who right now was outshining almost every possible future stars in the field despite coming off the bench. Just how could I miss such an amazing player in my previous life? Just by the looks on his eyes, which were glowing with admiration, and the tone of his voice, which was fawning over Mateo, one could tell how much impressed Hiro was at the moment. But strangely enough, he had never heard of this player in his previous life, which was arousing some doubts in his heart. Just then, while he was fawning over the play style of Mateo, sound of the notification from the system rung in his ears. Ding! New quest unlocked. Chapter 328, Skillful Maneuver. Akihiro, also famously known as Monk on steroids by many players in the league, given his bald-headed appearance and bulky build upon intercepting a pass in the middle third, sent the ball flying up the field. And Hiro, showcasing his excellent off-the-ball movement, got past his only mark with ease. Upon noticing the figure of Hiro that had easily shook his mark and currently on his way towards their post, many of the opposing players felt their heart palpitating. Wasn't he still injured? So how could he run like that? Several questions rose within the hearts of the players who previously had underestimated Hiro. For their one simple mistake, they were now going to pay a heavy price. Making use of his skill lightning steps, Hiro cut through the defense of the opposing team and immediately closed the distance between him and the ball. However, he wasn't the only one who was chasing after the ball currently. Desperate to produce results, Yuya, who was on his wits' end, was also blindly rushing towards the ball. If it continued, they were bound to overlap. And if that happened, their momentum might get disrupted and the opposing team might catch up to them. However, that wasn't the only concern of Hiro. Before speeding, Hiro had been keeping tabs of the position of every player on the field. And due to that, Hiro knew that Yuya was in an offside position. So now if he were to touch the ball, that would disrupt the whole build-up. Taking everything into consideration, despite knowing about the possibility that he might overlap with Yuya and the build-up might get disrupted, instead of slowing down, Hiro then tried to increase his pace so that he could reach the ball ahead of Yuya. What is that moron doing? Why is he rushing towards the ball as well? You idiot! Run towards the opposing post to receive a pass. Who the fuck even let him play? The reaction from the crowd upon seeing the selfish and dumb reaction of Yuya was quite negative, and almost every single fan of Kawasaki was complaining about his action. Getting to the ball before Yuya, Hiro kicked the ball as he sent the ball rolling ahead of him. At the same time as he kicked the ball ahead of him, he started chasing after the ball. Despite losing to Hiro, Yuya still continued his pursuit of the ball, but he wasn't as fast as Hiro. The only reason why he was competing with Hiro earlier was because he was way ahead of Hiro in the first place. If those two were to start from the same starting line, he wouldn't even come close to Hiro, even without the use of skill lightning steps. But now, when he was using his skill lightning steps, he wasn't even in the same picture as Hiro. He could only try to close up the distance between him and Hiro. Upon witnessing the figure of Hiro who was rushing towards him totally unobstructed, opposing keeper could tell that he would have to face against him one-on-one. Just thinking about that possibility caused his heart to sink and his eyes to become frantic. But he knew that he was totally helpless in this situation. So, the only person whom he could rely on right now was he himself. Letting out a mouth full of turbid air, he braced his heart as he analyzed the movement of Hiro. And the moment he calmed down himself, the figure of Hiro became even more clear. He could see those tiny details which he couldn't see before. For some while, he waited for Hiro to come close while also moving forward only up to the point where he could save Hiro's long shots while at the same time prepare himself for a close encounter. Thus, despite having enough time on his hands to leave his box, he didn't leave his box and instead stayed put inside his box. After waiting enough, he had no choice but to rush forward now, since Hiro had already come close to the box. While putting his guards on to block any long shots, he carefully approached Hiro. However, despite his carefulness, he had misjudged one thing and made a huge blunder in his judgment, letting Hiro to close and would probably be his biggest mistake right now. With his newly acquired talent, Knight in the area from the recent international tournament, Hiro's threat level would increase even more inside the penalty box. One could even say that him being inside the box was even more dangerous than his powerful long shots using his skill fireball shot. Will he shoot? When will he shoot? With such thoughts running amok in his mind, he approached Hiro with his guard raised. While his eyes were constantly on the lookout for any subtle changes in Hiro and converged to Hiro, Hiro wasn't even looking at him. Finally, as those two closed in their distance enough, the opposing keeper became impatient and threw his body towards Hiro. Sensing the incoming keeper, Hiro, while maintaining a poker face, lightly tapped at the bottom of the ball and chipped the ball above the keeper. At the same time, he also lifted himself from the ground and jumped over the keeper lying on the ground. The crowd erupted in a collective gasp, and in an instant their cheers transformed into a deafening roar as they witnessed Hiro's audacity and skill. It was a masterpiece in motion, an effortless display of technique and finesse. With the keeper lying behind, Hiro found himself in front of an open post. Now all he had to do was to tap the ball in. But despite being right in front of an open post, Hiro didn't shoot the ball towards the post. Instead, he shot the ball sideways, where Yuya was making his run. Yuya was dumbfounded by Hiro's decision. Instead of shooting the ball towards the post, he had decided to make a pass. Chapter 3:27 Pretense. While Hiro and Shun were enjoying this moment, Yuya, on the other hand, was sweating profusely. Inside the tunnel, he had been acting all fine, but upon confronting the crowds, his legs had lost its strength while his palms had become sticky with sweat. Those cheerful cheers were like harsh curses hauled towards him, and those cheerful fans were like onlookers who had come to see his doom. It was probably his last chance to prove himself. If he couldn't capitalize this opportunity, his doom was inevitable, and he very well knew about it, which is why he was anxious even more than before. Well, even though you're my teammate in the national team, but don't expect me to go easy on you, though. Showcasing a smirk on his face, Takumi, who was currently acting as the captain of the opposing team, reminded Hiro that he wouldn't go easy on him. Well, aren't you so considerate? In a rather sarcastic way, Hiro replied. Immediately, those sentences which left Hiro's mouth got on his nerves as he felt his eyes twitching. But before Takumi could even respond to Hiro, cameramen who were covering this match caught up to them and started taking pictures. Takumi now had no choice but to smile despite feeling humiliated by Hiro's response. A starting striker for his club, but a reserve striker for the national team. Because of the presence of a striker like Nijichi, he had been left out of the limelight in the national team. But right now, he was one of the core players of his team. And unlike before, currently he was one of the players who was at the center of the attention. Involving with Hiro in current situation came both with a risk and a reward. And Takumi was very well aware of that fact as well. Thus, he didn't say anything to Hiro and instead showcased an amiable smile on his face. Antagonizing Hiro was akin to antagonizing thousands of fans who supported Hiro. And with his measly reputation, it was like an ant trying to go up against an elephant. After a short, while his players of both the team exchanged friendly greetings and positioned themselves in their respective position, the game begun with the whistle of the referee. Beep! The opposing team started the kickoff. And no sooner had the ball started rolling, players of both the team went into action. As much as this game was important to players of Kawasaki, it was equally important to the players of Aomori. This one match could define the fate of their team's ranking at the end of the season. Kawasaki, being the defending champion, wanted to retain their position, while Aomori, being one of the favorite for the title, wanted to dethrone the previous champion and take the crown for themselves. Thus both teams were rather careful and vigilant. While moving the ball in their own half, Aomori's team slowly tried to draw the players of Kawasaki towards them. But their efforts were in vain, as no matter how much they tried to provoke or bait the players of Kawasaki, nobody was going for the bait. Moving in fixed position while staying close to each other, players of Kawasaki put pressure on the opposing players without even charging. At times, only one player would step forward for the ball, while the remaining would retain their position, covering him and closing the gaps for the opposing team. From an onlooker's point of view, players of Aomori seemed to be in control of the game, given their dominance on the ball. But only upon closer inspection would one realize that the people who were in control of the game was the players of Kawasaki, controlling the flow of the game and dictating the open spaces. Currently, they were controlling this game from behind the scenes. Soon enough, players of Aomori were starting to realize this as well. Compared to the opposing players, they looked rather miserable. Not only were they running out of breath, but their minds were also in a distressful state. It was getting harder for them to think clearly. With players of Kawasaki scattered everywhere, they were not being able to locate any open spaces or find an opportunity to move the ball forward. Focusing their attention on Hiro had costed them quite a lot. 34 minutes had already gone by, and not even a single shot on target had been recorded from both the team. Even Hiro, who normally would be one of the most active players on the field, was rather inactive in this match today. Apart from scanning and providing passes, he hadn't done much today. And because of such lousy performance from Hiro, seeds of doubts had started sprouting in the heart of the opposing players. Is he injured? Takumi did tell us that he had been hospitalized at the end of the final match. Perhaps his injuries hadn't healed completely yet. While preparing for this match, Takumi had disclosed the condition of Hiro to his teammates so that they could prepare better against him. But now until this point of match, upon noticing Hiro's inactiveness, they were starting to doubt whether Hiro was still recovering and thus was unable to perform like before. It would have been a completely different scenario if he was totally fine. But now that he was injured and his movements were limited, they had it rather easy. Instead of guarding him with 3 of their players, even a single player would suffice to guard against this injured beast. And by doing so, they would free up 2 of their players, which would further assist them in building up their gameplay and break free from this trap, like formations set by the opposing team. The reason why they were struggling up till now was solely because of the lack of manpower. But now as they decided to ditch Hiro, for sure their gameplay would improve. That's what they thought. But man oh man, how careless were they to think that way? The beast that had sleeping until this point of time, the moment they let their guard against them, immediately lunged towards them and grabbed them by their neck. Chapter 3, 30 Dropping Deep. Just based on Yuya's bodily gestures, Hiro could feel the sincerity behind his words. And since he never held any grudges against him, despite his recent rude behavior towards him, Hiro readily accepted his gratitude without pressing further on that matter. Don't worry about it, and play it cool, no pressure. Hiro had countless reason to be furious at him, but despite that he neither raised his voice nor pointed out his flaws, all he did was to suggest him to take it easy and try to take some pressure off of him. But just because Hiro had decided to let go of the fact that because of his selfishness he had nearly costed his team a crucial goal didn't mean that others were also willing to let go of him. Especially coaches, they couldn't be swayed by emotions. They were well aware of his actions, and currently manager Makoto was already planning on replacing him. Sure, he finally scored a goal. Sure, he could put the blame on his desperation. But no matter what reason it be, he had done wrong. And that was a fact that couldn't be changed no matter what. Turning his gaze towards his notebook, Manager Makoto scribbled something on his notebook before heading back towards his seat with a solemn expression on his face. Just by looking at him, one could hardly tell what was running on his mind currently. Soon as every players from both the team got to their respective position, referee took a glance at his watch before blowing the whistle he had trapped between his lips. Beep! Again with the sound of the referee's whistle, the game resumed in full swing. Having made that error which costed their team one precious goal, players of Aomori learned from their mistake and started guarding against Hiro. They could no longer lower their guard like they had done before. But now with this goal, the arrow had already left the bow. And now all they could do was shield against this arrow, which was heading towards them at threatening pace. Unlike before, now Hiro was running all over the field, and those players who were supposed to mark him had no choice but to follow him. However, instead of moving upfield, Hiro was dropping deep and playing as a deep-line playmaker. Before, his movements were mostly limited at the other side of the half-line. But now that he was dropping deep, he was playing more like a true midfielder rather than a false nine. Supporting his teammates and initiating attacks, he was stabilizing his team's midfield. This action didn't go unnoticed, as the manager of the opposing team immediately caught the whiff of Hiro's intention. But what could he do? He had two options: either to yell his findings or wait for halftime to inform his players. But who knows? Until then, his team wouldn't concede another goal because of this trivial change. After that previous goal, the pressure on the opposing team had already increased, but now that they had to face against this unforeseen variable, situation have gotten even harder for them. And their struggle was quite evident to even naked eyes. Even the fans could tell that they were struggling. It was like none of them knew clearly about what to do while encountering such situation. And because of their previous blunder, they were even afraid to improvise their tactics. Fear of getting blamed, fear of being the scapegoat, and fear of facing the wrath of their coaching staff was preventing them from improvising their strategies. Al-Mori, being the league leader, had an impressive squad. But since this team emphasized more on discipline, it lacked creative players who could add some spice on the team. Sure, their players were physically fit and could execute the strategies flawlessly, but once a variable occurs, everything starts to fall apart. One could even accredit that the glory of this team to their strict style of playing football. They could be even regarded as a notebook team. Acting as an fulcrum, Hiro connected the passes between his teammates while at the same time created spaces in the formation of the opposing team. If anybody studied Hiro's heat map currently, they would mostly find his movements concentrated at the middle third. Playing 1-2 passes with Akihiro, all of a sudden Hiro burst into acceleration. Immediately, the player that was assigned to Hiro moved his body forward to stop Hiro from advancing forward. Such tactics where a player in front would use their bodies to stop speedy players was often used by those players who couldn't compete against the other players in terms of speed. And almost everybody in league was aware of the speed of Hiro. Once he starts running, anybody could barely catch up to him. So as there's a saying that goes by, prevention is better than cure. Players of the opposing, when encountering Hiro, would always try to stop his movement beforehand than to compete against him in terms of speed. Noticing the intention of the opposing player, Hiro immediately changed his direction. But so did the opposing player whose eyes was converged at him solely. The moment that player left his position to chase after Hiro, a space opened up in his original place from where Akihiro, who despite being not fast as Hiro, easily got past without any trouble. In this attack, Hiro was merely a decoy to distract the opposing player. Akihiro, as he moved forward, sent the ball flying toward a boy with pretty face who had a knack for scoring goals. Renji was the same player who had been drafted along with Akihiro in the trial. With a pretty face and a haughty demeanor, he had quite the fan following. Although most of them consisted of female fans, but yet he was quite famous. Renji then, upon receiving the pass, easily dribbled past the defender in front of him. But no sooner had he got past the reach of one defender, he immediately got surrounded with two more, which in turn pushed him to make a pass. Chapter 329. 1 goal. With a dumbfounded look on his face, Ya, upon receiving the pass, dazedly stared at Hiro before tapping the ball inside the post. This wasn't simply a pass or an assist to him. It was more like a gift. It was an act of kindness and an act of unselfishness. Being absent for many games due to the qualifier, Hiro's goal tally wasn't much high as compared to his previous season. In fact, he wasn't even the top scorer of the league. Yet even after doing most of the work, he was letting him reap the rewards. Why was he envious of such a player? Why was he rude to such a friend who, despite being way out of his league, was good to him? Has all those success and attention he had received in the U15 team gone over his head? Or has he simply become arrogant? As the ball sailed effortlessly in the back of the net, fans burst into thunderous roar as they erupted in jubilation. Emotions of joy and disappointment merged in the stand while the flags and banner of Kawasaki billowed freely with the wind. Yet Iya, despite scoring this goal, his face betrayed the emotions of jubilation which was lingering around the stadium. It was his first goal in the league, a goal that he had longed so much for that he had even antagonized his friends. But now when he had finally achieved the thing he had desired the most in his recent days, not even a speck of happiness could be seen on his face. Instead, with his eyes dazedly staring at Hiro, he had rather guilty and dumbfounded look on his face. Lifting the corner of his lips, Hiro displayed an amiable smile on his face while congratulating Yuya, without speaking any words. Sure, he had gifted Yuya a goal, but still he didn't want Yuya to feel that he did so out of pity or sympathy towards him. Thus, despite assisting him, Hiro kept his mouth shut and instead only displayed an amiable smile to congratulate him. At this moment, Yuya came to a realization that he had been blinded by his inferiority, that he had been hating Hiro for absolutely no reason. Sure, Hiro was gifted, but never had he ever deliberately made others feel that he looked down on them. In fact, he had always tried to help those close to him. Just take the example of Shunta, who after listening to his advice had become a regular in the U15 team. But what did he do when he tried to help him? He pushed him away and even became envious of the person who was just trying to help him. While his teammates were rushing towards him, wearing jubilant smile on their faces, he was standing still at his place with a feeling of guilt gnawing on him. He was so ashamed of himself that he couldn't even bring himself to apologize. All he could do was silently atone for the mistakes he had committed and grieve about his behavior. The more I see him play, the more I come to admire this guy. Just can you believe, Sakazuki, that such an unselfish player exists in this day, in this age? Indeed, Kojiro, it's really hard to believe that such an unselfish player exists even in this age when everybody are greedy for goals and recognition. If I'm not wrong, then, that goal scorer must be the recently promoted player who had been struggling to perform well. Now that you mention about it, he indeed is that recently promoted player who goes by the name Yuya. So Hiro did all this to encourage his teammate. For a while, because of Hiro's selfless act, both the commentators kept on praising Hiro. Even the fans who were currently in a jubilant mood didn't seem like they minded the idle talk of those commentators. And many of the fans were almost in the same situation as the commentators. They were extremely impressed by Hiro's selfless act. In the sidelines, manager Makoto's time-worn face was adorned with a satiated grin, while the reserve players, while jumping, yelling, hugging, and high-fiving each other, were celebrating the goal like crazy. Meanwhile, about some distance away from them, Aomori's substitution box looked rather gloomy. With dark shadows lingering on their faces, they were all unusually silent. But unsatisfaction and distress was quite evident on their faces. Their coach, however, was like a variable to that unusually silent environment. Yelling at the top of his voice with rather furious tone, he was expressing his dissatisfaction. "Didn't I tell you to mark him? So why the hell did you let him lose? Are you disobeying my orders?" Going on and on about his strategy and how they had failed to execute his strategies, he kept on yelling at his players, while his players who were currently on the field seemed to be avoiding his runts and his gaze. With a rather sour face, they were trying their best to avoid looking at their manager, who right now was hauling curses at them for their blunder. Many of them knew that the anger of their manager was justifiable, as it was their own mistake of underestimating Hiro which had led to this disastrous outcome. If only they would have stuck with their manager's plan and didn't try to become oversmart, this situation might have been avoided. Now one may wonder, why were they making huge issue out of one goal with so much time remaining? It was because of the sheer importance of this match that every single goal was of utmost importance. One goal could very well deter the outcome of the game. One goal could increase the pressure on the players to a level beyond expectation. This one goal could also end their hope for the title. So would anyone still dare to ask, why would anyone make so much fuss about one goal? After a short moment of celebration, as everybody started returning to their original position, Yuya chased after Hiro. "Thanks." With great difficulty, while trying to avoid looking Hiro in the eyes, Ya thanked Hiro for that previous assist. Chapter 326 Important Match. Quest info. Analyze the play style of the player Matteo and come up with a satisfactory outcome. Duration, 30 days. Rewards on completion. One of the talent of the player. Failure, loss of one of your skill. Note, you cannot use your skill magic vision on him during the time period. As if the gameplay of Matteo triggered in Eureka, suddenly out of nowhere the system provided him a quest to analyze the playstyle of Matteo, whose plays he had found extremely intriguing. Although a bit crude and rough, but Matteo's gameplay had a charm in it that could captivate the hearts of people. And Hiro, who himself liked watching exceptional players, nonetheless was fascinated by his play. Even if the system hadn't provided him with this quest, he would have for sure tried to analyze his plays and tried to employ it himself. And also the system didn't give him any option to reject the quest. It was like a mandatory quest, not to mention that he couldn't use his skill magic vision on him. If he could only get a bit of insight of his stats and wow factors, the quest would have been rather easy. However, while skimming through the contents of the quest, Hiro was rather perplexed by one thing. It's just that the duration was rather long. In fact, the duration for this quest was one of the longest he had got till now. But as he tried to look on internet about this unknown player named Matteo, he found nothing about him. It's as if before this match, he hadn't even existed. For where did this player come from? There's literally no info about him on the internet. Hiro murmured in a rather dejected and surprised tone. Only after he failed to find anything related to this player named Matteo Gomez, who had entered the field at 80th minute and completely changed the flow of the game all by himself, he came to a realization. No wonder system gave me such a long time for this quest. Hiro murmured after realizing. The reason why he had gotten that long of time was because of the lack of information regarding this player that he had to analyze. Now, with such problems in his hand, if he wanted to analyze the playstyle of this player, then he had only one option, and that was to follow this player through his journey in the qualifiers. Every single game which he played was of utmost importance to Hiro right now. Thus, immediately without wasting any time, he brought his pen and paper out. Downloading the video so that he could play it offline, he started analyzing the performance of almost every player. While analyzing, it's rather crucial to take the position of almost every other player present on the field. Just because he had to submit a report about Matteo's performance only didn't mean that he could neglect the position of other players on the field. Only by taking everybody's position into account would he be able to get a thorough analysis. See, I told you that he isn't like others. Yeah, you're right. Two individuals from the coaching staff who seemed rather shady, given their carefulness and sneakiness, were right now spying on Hiro through the small opening in the door. And judging by the conversation which they were having, it seemed like one of the individual was quite dubious of Hiro, while the other one had faith in him. Aomori Stadium. The way he cut in from the flanks and the way he smoothly dribbled past his opponent, it kind of resembled the playstyle of Neymar during his early years. Contemplating about the performance of Matteo, Hiro right now was lost in a world of his own while he was at the front of a queue leading his teammates in a match between Kawasaki and Aomori Yamada High School. Right now, the sun was pretty high up in the sky while the temperature around the stadium was rather hot. As if a giant was smoking a humongous cigarette, white puffy clouds could be seen in large quantity floating from the horizon. Under the azure expanse, right now the stadium was a spectacle to behold. Towering stands draped in vibrant colors lined the pitch, creating a sea of passionate supporters. Flags of both the teams billowed and flapped in the wind, showcasing the unwavering allegiance to their respective team. The reason why this tiny stadium that could barely hold 10,000 people in it was crowded today was because of the presence of one player. A player who right now had become the apple to the eye of many Japanese fans. The player that had displayed outstanding performance in the international stage and spread the name of their country. Sakazuki, don't you think that the stadium of Aomori is looking rather cramped and lively today? Well, Kojiro, our national hero, is making his arrival today. So, I'm sure all these people are here to welcome him and watch him play. While the cheers grew louder, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of fervor and anticipation. These two commentators who were responsible to comment on this game made lively talk while trying to lighten up the mood in the stadium. Now, let us welcome the players with a big round of applause. The commentators urged the people to welcome the players with a big round of applause. No sooner had the commentators announced the entry of the players of the opposing team immediately started moving forward while Hiro stood his ground, still contemplating about the playstyle of Mateo. "Oi, how long are you planning on staying here?" Giving him a light push, Yuya, who was right behind Hiro, complained in a rather annoyed tone. Immediately, that push caused Hiro to break out of his reverie. Yet he didn't mind Yuya's tone or his action of pushing him. Coming to his sense, Hiro then started marching forward like a valiant general leading his troops. Exiting the dim tunnel, Hiro glanced upwards. Immediately upon seeing the appearance of Hiro, the fans who were desperately awaiting for his arrival burst into exuberant chants and cheers. Those cheers in turn bounced off the walls of the stadium and added spice to this frenzied atmosphere. "Oh, how much I miss this crowd." Sounding extremely grateful, Shun expressed his thankfulness with his eyes glistening with nostalgia and joy.